if you live in a neighborhood where there's a realistic expectation that somebody's going to get killed or that you could get hurt, you know, that affects your day-to-day, everything that you do every day.
American families are concerned about crime, from parents to their children.
I'm afraid like what people feel like whenever the bullet comes like inside of them.
When I was a kid that age, I never really asked those questions, but nowadays, you know, there's more shootings.
By one study, almost a third of the country has witnessed gun violence. 18% of people worry almost every day about losing a loved one.
I feel like it's just the community needs more community.
This week on The Race, we're exploring the impact of crime in America. What's being done to make this country safer, and is it working?
Saying we had 7 guys on.
After you.
Thank you, sir. So you just tell us what you need and we'll...
This is Mayor Marcus.
Stand by. Fire.
He brought us to this gun range to show us how he trains people to become armed security guards.
One more.
The industry of private security has been growing, and while you might see a security guard at the grocery store or at the mall, we wanted to know what qualifications do they have, especially the guards who are armed.
So I'll just tell you guys what we're going to do, and we'll just go through it one by one. The majority of it is classroom. Then you have hands-on courses that cover combatives, handcuffing, pepper spray, baton, and firearms. And you'll actually do those things hands-on as part of your training. Stand by. Fire.
Marcus works for Ranger Guard, a private security company based in Houston with roughly 400 security guards in Texas. It also operates in Florida and Nevada.
A big part of that comes down to response time. You can't beat the response time of someone that's there on site already.
Many of the guards he trains will patrol parking lots, construction sites, and even schools, like this private one in Houston.
In the past, the way that security guards were perceived was bad.
When I think of the word security guard, I think of the...
Mock-up.
Yeah. Ranger Guard's founder, David Catran, may be aware of what some people think of security guards, but he says that's changing, especially with property crimes increasing last year in many large cities, according to a report by the national nonprofit, the Council on Criminal Justice. Crimes like car thefts and break-ins are solved only 13% of the time, according to Pew Research. He says businesses are willing to pay him more for someone to stand guard.
If we go back, I would say 5 years ago, where police would command, let's say, $45 an hour, and security guard company would come in at around $19 to $20 an hour. Today, I can say that we're even.
While more businesses may be turning to private security with many police departments stretched thin, Robert McCree, who teaches at the John Jay School of Criminal Justice in New York and has studied private security since the 70s, tells me it's important to understand the difference between private security and private police.
The industry doesn't like that term, private police, because they really aren't police. Private security officers are there to deter, to detect, to respond, but not to put their lives at risk if something untoward is occurring.
The qualifications to be a security guard vary from state to state.
On the target.
Along with the firearms training we saw, in Texas, security guards also need to pass background checks.
Every state is different, and so it's a state-run industry. And so even to the local level sometimes.
I spoke with Steve Amate with the National Association of Security Companies. He travels the country in support of states adding training requirements for security guards. There's no national standard, but more cities and states are putting in training requirement laws. He says right now 28 states require specific hours of training for a security guard to carry a gun. This week, Maryland's governor signed a bill that will make his state the 29th next year. A law is now in effect in Tennessee that requires security guards to go through de-escalation training as well as learn CPR and first aid. The law is called Dallas's Law, named after a man who died after being restrained by security guards in Nashville in 2021. I did ask what concerns Amate as security guards are being hired to protect more places.
I do worry that people are going to think that this private security officer, he's wearing a uniform, he's armed, but he's not a police officer. And so tempering that expectation, it's very important.
He says it's important people remember the job of many security guards is to deter crime.
It's a deterrent for crime to potentially happen. It's not going to stop everything, but like if you see a car that's marked with lights and somebody's driving around constantly being present, that criminal looking to score a quick couple $100 from a catalytic converter is going to think twice before stepping foot on your property.
Jared Dubin, whose property management company hires Ranger Guard, says even with high-tech tools and camera systems on the market that can observe crime, there is power in the human touch, and people like those, Marcus traits. Part of the reason that businesses feel like they need to invest in private security is shoplifting. That is now nearly a $100 billion problem in this country. In one well-publicized incident from April, a shoplifter allegedly stole from a Family Dollar in Akron, Ohio. A person who tracked the shoplifter found themselves under attack by a group of people.
I saw this commotion and it was crazy, it was wild.
The problem is pushing several influential chains to close big city locations.
As Portland wakes up, downtown store owners like Stephen Lynn prepare to welcome shoppers. But opening the store looks a lot different than it did a few years ago.
We didn't have gates on the entryway. We weren't worried about our windows being broken, and shoplifting was something that almost never happened.
And now?
We've gone through a lot. I actually put my hand in my pocket, make sure my mace is available. I go to steel gates, and I have to open them with a key.
Lynn's business is one of more than 50% of small businesses across the country that report an increase in shoplifting.
We've gone up 800%. So the changes are stark, and there are things that I didn't expect when I opened a small business so many years ago.
It's not just Portland and not just small businesses.
Organized retail crime is happening everywhere. Large national retailers, small businesses.
The National Retail Federation estimates stolen goods cost retailers $94 billion in 2021. It says the bigger problem isn't about individual shoplifters as much as it is organized retail crime.
These are criminal enterprises that organize, plan, and orchestrate groups of shoplifters who go in and steal often and large quantities of theft.
A National Retail Federation survey shows this organized crime cost stores an average of more than $700,000 per $1 billion in sales in 2020. That's up more than 50% in the last 5 years. You've likely seen the videos of brazen thefts at high-end retailers, so-called smash and grabs. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce sent this letter to members of Congress urging them to pass legislation to stop the sale of stolen items online. The letter says 25% of small businesses report raising prices because of shoplifting. And it's not just the sting of retail losses businesses feel.
We've had 3 major windows broken out with rocks, with grabbing product out through the windows. Each of my windows is a little over $4,500 to replace.
There's also the cost of extra security measures in the form of gates, staff, cameras. Some larger retailers are locking up everyday items like coffee, deodorant, even socks.
What's going to happen is that we're going to end up having more barriers to make shopping entertaining. And when you put barriers in place, that's going to hurt the businesses even more.
This impacts the consumer as much as it impacts the retailer.
Shuttered storefronts across the U.S. In San Francisco, Walgreens says it closed multiple stores in 2021 because of organized retail crime. Lynn is still processing the news that outdoor recreation retailer REI will close its stores in Portland's nearby Pearl District by early next year. In a letter sent to customers, REI leadership says last year, the Portland store had its highest number of break-ins and thefts in 2 decades, despite actions to provide extra security.
There are a lot of factors that have contributed to this over the past several years.
Some point to inflation, saying the value of goods stolen is higher. Others point to online marketplaces that make it easier for criminals to sell stolen items. The Marshall Project, a nonprofit journalism organization, looked for data that showed a trend and instead found police data is missing. The National Retail Federation blames part of the rise on thieves not being harshly prosecuted. Oregon lawmakers are now considering a pair of bills to combat the problem, one that would set aside $5 million to help pay for more law enforcement. The other would up the penalties for anyone convicted of organized retail theft. If passed, the state would join a handful of others that stiffened the punishment for stealing last year.
But guess what? We're fed up. We are fed up.
It's not just businesses reconsidering safety and how to protect property. Schools are changing their designs as well, adding features like curved hallways. We'll have a close look at some of those improvements next on The Race. You might remember a couple of things that you did as a teen you hoped your parents wouldn't find out about, something like skipping school. But today there is a growing problem that is far more serious for teenagers, and that is guns. About 30% of young people have personal experience with gun violence, according to a 2022 survey. 50% of young people think about mass shootings or school shootings at least once a week.
For me, it means not being scared to come to school every day. It means going to a bus stop and not getting shot.
These factors are fueling changes in the way schools are designed across the country.
When I stepped inside here at Caledonia High School in Michigan, the first thing that came to mind was, wow, schools did not look like this back in my day. And there are reasons the architectural layout is changing. One of the most important is school safety.
1999 was the start of a rude awakening. Columbine.
So that was, I think, the nation's wake-up call to violence in schools.
You know, this is my 27th year as an educator, and I remember all the way back to Columbine and the impact that that had on the psyche of public schools and safety.
Back then, schools weren't necessarily designed to stop a shooter.
It's really for functionality. So square footage is important. How many desks and chairs can you get in an area? Do you have the blackboard? And the biggest pieces we thought about for safety was, where is the exit in case of a fire?
The reality is different now. In the past 5 years, more than 150 shootings inside schools have resulted in either injuries or deaths, according to Ed Week.
It's imperative that we don't have the luxury of not getting this right, because the stakes are too high.
Dr. Diedrich Martin is the superintendent of Caledonia Community Schools in West Michigan.
Please excuse varsity softball.
His district is changing the way it builds schools.
If there's anything about this school that you could point out and say, I really want other places across the country to see this as a model, what would that be?
One, the secure entries. Two, is having some secure filming area around the windows. Those are things. And really, it's the staff that are in the buildings that are going to make it work.
Upgrades in schools like curved hallways and corridors divided by fire doors and stronger locks. Other ideas impact classrooms themselves. Reshaped rooms create student safe zones to hide, not visible from the door. Even classroom door barricade systems that can be quickly installed. Tower Pinkster specializes in upgrading classrooms. They do about $400 million of K-12 construction a year.
If there's a receptionist here, they can see you on approach, they can see you in the vestibule, they can see you as you come in.
Matthew Slagle leads the firm's design for K-12 schools.
When you walk in a school that you guys are working on right now, I mean, what are some of the biggest differences that we see?
Well, certainly the entry point that you mentioned, what we call a secure vestibule, where once the bell rings, you can't get into the school anyway but that front entry door, and you're guided into the office.
Schools around the country are also considering new social spaces to support students' mental health, balancing safety with social development. As the school resource officer at Caledonia High School, Patrick Stewart sees firsthand the difference those types of spaces can make.
So as a school resource officer, yes, I am a law enforcement official first and foremost to keep them safe. But I'm also an informal counselor, a mentor, a teacher, an educator.
Stewart says balance is important, especially now.
Do you think it's safe to say that changes architecturally to schools across the country is going to be crucial in keeping our kids safe regardless of any other actions that are taken?
Absolutely, regardless of any other legislative action or what have you. We are in a time, or we're living in a time, where we have to really think about function, form, and security.
The race continues. Next. After decades of decline, violent juvenile crime surged during the pandemic. The number of homicides committed by juveniles rose by 30%. The number committed by kids under 14 hit a 2-decade high. That shift is driving many nonprofits whose goal is to keep kids on the path to success.
As the summer approaches, a season known for its spike in violence in Chicago, like many cities, young people are fighting back with fire and baseball bats. Deontay Holman says the first time he tried glass blowing, he was nervous.
I didn't know what I was doing, and it was so hot to where I'm a clumsy type guy too.
Holman started with Firebird Community Arts more than 10 years ago after he was shot.
Before I got shot, I was not caring. Like, I ain't care about nothing, bro. I ain't care about where I was at, who I was talking to.
Firebird Community Arts works with students who have been injured by gun violence. The program combines counseling, mentorship, and glass blowing to help teens work through trauma. Karen Reyes has been executive director here for 11 years.
It both attracts young people because young people are attracted to risk and danger. It's exciting. It sort of releases that adrenaline. But it also forms like a mandate to keep each other safe.
Even just watching people make stuff out of glass, you get totally drawn in. It's mesmerizing.
Dr. Brad Staubach co-founded Firebird, originally known as Project Fire, back in 2014.
And one of the key parts of recovery from trauma is helping people be in the present.
And while the Firebird program deals with people directly impacted by gun violence, you don't have to be injured to feel the effects of community violence.
Our kids are dealing with this whether they're street involved or not. If you live in a neighborhood where there's a realistic expectation that somebody's going to get killed or that you could get hurt, you know, that affects your day-to-day, everything that you do every day. That's in the background.
After a turbulent 2 years of increased violence across the country, the number of homicides are moving in the right direction. In Chicago, shootings and murders are down to their lowest levels since 2019. Still, guns are the leading cause of death for children and teens nationwide, more than car crashes and cancer. Nearly half of American teenagers say they've experienced some type of violence within the past year.
I haven't seen you in a minute. What you been up to?
Across the city on the south side of Chicago, Levante Stewart is hoping to grab kids before it's too late.
It starts taking a toll. It starts adding up when this is what you start. I should be collecting baseball cards, not, obituaries. And each of these young people meant something to me personally.
Stewart's organization, Lost Boys, works to prevent youth violence through sports.
Turn that body, step into it, turn the hip.
Lost Boys hosts its own baseball leagues with boys and girls teams while providing mentorship and therapy to its participants.
It's amazing. I can't even find the right word to describe what it's like. And then having the right coaches and mentors around that are walking them through it, sticking with them, encouraging them, showing them. And then they start seeing their own progress and development, and they're like, I did that.
Stewart says sports serve as the gateway to everything else.
Now they're receptive because of the sport, and they're connected with the coach. Now they're developing a bond, so they trust coach. I trust you to tell me about the political structures that exist in my community. I trust you to educate me on my emotions and how I learn to regulate them and teaching me exercises.
As the Firebird and Lost Boys programs have expanded, former participants often stick around and become full-time employees.
Probably 50% of the current staff are program alumni.
Creating a pipeline to not only grow the programs, but impact more kids.
I'm excited to figure out who's going to take over over after me. And I think it needs to be somebody who has some more lived experience, like the folks that we serve.
Holman, now a staffer at Firebird, says creating art offered him a joy he never had on the streets, and he wants to pass that along to kids coming behind him.
That's my success story right there for me. Like, I realize just a joy, like seeing something come out. In reality, bro, when you in them streets, bro, it's not a lot of people that come out. I'm just winning right now.
More next on The Race. That will do it for us this week. From Houston, I'm Chris Stewart. Join us next week for The Race.